with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, September 13th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Yohuru Williams, historian and founding director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas, and Michael Lansing, professor of history at Augsburg University, on their public history project, Overpoliced and Underprotected, in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Then Mario Ariza, investigative reporter at Floodlight News, on the first initiative in the country to turn a private energy distribution company public statewide in Maine. Meanwhile, Kevin McCarthy begins impeachment in the House in a desperate attempt to save his job. Republicans apparently are sitting on testimony from an FBI agent who oversaw the Hunter Biden investigation that refutes their so-called whistleblower. UAW rolls out work stoppage plans as the deadline for its strike loom. Gas prices and rent drive inflation higher in August. And the poverty rate soared amongst children and more in 2022. Wisconsin Republicans cave on impeaching a liberal judge for her winning a campaign, but offer a fake independent redistricting plan in its stead. Meanwhile, the CDC, following the FDA approval, recommends that now FDA-approved boosters to everyone. 5 former Memphis cops indicted in the Tyree Nichols case, and Libyan flood death toll now at over 5,000. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. We are again short-staffed because we as a show decided to get COVID, and so I don't know why we decided to do that. It was, in retrospect, a bad decision, but sometimes you try. It's like I was faced with an option. Am I going to spend $4,500 a person on sending us each to a trust camp where we do rope climbing and trust falls, or we all get COVID and isolate from each other? And of course, that's the one I chose. It's conceivable that Emma will be here tomorrow, and I'll be out, take a little bit of a rest, but we'll see. But thanks for joining us. Appreciate your support. Appreciate all the nice messages we have gotten. So the Republican Party yesterday essentially made the decision to hand Joe Biden a nice gift in the form of attempting to impeach him. There was a lot of debate when Democrats were impeaching Donald Trump, which they did twice, if you'll recall, as to whether this was going to hurt Democratic chances in the 2020 election. I had this debate with people both on the, within the sort of center to the all the way to the left, And I think that even came up with Tim Pool in the last debate that he had with me, where he called me Thanos. And I always contended that it wasn't in any way going to inhibit democratic elections. In fact, it was probably going to help, because the Democratic base needed to see that Democrats were actually fighting Donald Trump and understood that he was a problem. I don't think it works the same way. Democrats and Republicans are simply not the same type of voters for the most part, because I don't think this ever is a strategy that affects people in the middle for the most part. I don't think there's huge swaths of those people. I definitely think the Republican base would have been upset had the Republicans not impeached or attempted to impeach Joe Biden, but they were going to vote anyways. As opposed to Democrats in, let's say, 2018 or 2020. And so what I do think this is going to do is it's going to cause Democrats to rally around Joe Biden, even though I think the majority of Democrats feel like he is too old to run again. It's just going to highlight, I think, some of the craziness on the Republican side, because they really have not much to offer in terms of these impeachment hearings. Here is Kevin McCarthy on Capitol Hill speaking to the press, talking about his impeachment inquiry. And let's be clear, he cannot start this road and get off the impeachment trail. They have to impeach Biden at this point. Here he is.
You know, in the months that we were gone and the weeks, House Republicans have uncovered serious and credible allegations into President Biden's conduct. Taken together, these allegations paint a picture of a culture of corruption. Now, here's what we know so far. Through our investigations, we have found that President Biden did lie to the American people about his own knowledge of his family's foreign business dealings. Eyewitnesses have testified that the president joined on multiple phone calls and had multiple interactions. Dinners resulted in cars and millions of dollars into his son's business partners. We know that bank records show that nearly
just to make that clear, what the testimony regarding those phone calls was specifically that in the middle of meetings that Hunter Biden would have, he would call up the president, put him on speakerphone. The president wasn't even necessarily aware there were other people in the room, talk about the weather or just check in. Hey, Dad, just checking in. How you doing? As a way of showing everybody in the room that he had a relationship with his father, because it was very conceivable that his father would have shut him off at that point. With no doubt, Hunter Biden, I don't want to say every single dollar he's made, has been made via nepotism. That, however, maybe nepotism's not the right word. He's traded on his name. He's traded on his relationship with his father. But that does not implicate Joe Biden in that manner. And believe me, there'd be a lot of people who could be impeached if that was the case. Continue.
$1 million in payments were directed to the Biden family members and associates through various shell companies. The Treasury Department alone has more than 150 transactions involving the Biden family and other business associates that were flagged as suspicious activity by U.S. banks. Even a trusted FBI informant has alleged a bribe to the Biden family. Biden used his official office to coordinate with Hunter Biden's business partners about Hunter's role in Burisma, a Ukrainian energy company. Finally, despite these serious allegations, it appears that the president's family has been offered special treatment by Biden's own administration. Treatment that not otherwise would have received if they were not related to the president. These are allegations of abuse of power, obstruction, and corruption, and they warrant further investigation by the House of Representatives. That's why today I am directing our House committee to open a formal impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. This logical next step.
Let's go to, I mean, since he's talking about what warrants investigation, these investigations have been ongoing for 2.5 years. And let's check in on what actual charges they have, or not even charges, evidence they have on these allegations. Remember, anybody can make allegations. But here is Representative Scott Perry, Republican from Pennsylvania, with a reporter, we don't know that reporter's name, at the Freedom Caucus press conference outside of, just off of Capitol Hill, right after this announcement about the impeachment.
He would do that. I don't think it'd be appropriate. All right, last question. Yes, ma'am.
Can I just ask, what actual evidence do you have as opposed to allegations to show to the American public that would merit an actual impeachment inquiry of Joe Biden and prove that today isn't just about some of you?
Oh, I don't know.
McCarthy for the sake of enacting political revenge.
This isn't about political revenge. We have the bank accounts. We can see, ma'am, you can see that the homes that the Bidens own can't be afforded on a congressional or Senate salary. You also understand that it's
Pause
not
it for
normal.
a second. The homes that the Bidens own, he's talking about the relatives of the Bidens.
Right.
Who are not in Congress. Go ahead. Continue, go back.
Ma'am, you can see that the homes that the Bidens own can't be afforded on a congressional or Senate salary. You also understand that it's not normal for family members to receive millions of dollars from overseas interests. Those things aren't normal. That's not normal to have 20 shell companies. These things are not normal, and it alludes to not only just widespread corruption, but money laundering, if not influence peddling itself. And we also have the president, the vice president at the time, on record saying that the prosecutor was fired. Well, son of a bitch, the prosecutor was fired, right? Because the prosecutor was going after the company that his son was working on. That's what we have. If you can't see that, if you are that blunt, look, I'll turn it over to the attorneys.
People can't see that. They think it's political revenge.
It's because you don't report on it.
You're not, We're reporting on it today.
I'm not sure how you know what the American people think, but here's what they might wonder. Actually, if you're a federal prosecutor, you would.
So here's someone trying to report on it, and the Burisma thing, everyone, I think at this point knows that the reason why this prosecutor Shokin in Ukraine was removed was because they were not going after Burisma enough. And I mean, there were other reasons. This was stated American policy. And I guess the argument is that the stated American policy, which existed prior to Hunter Biden being put on that board of directors, was because Hunter Biden was on the board of directors? Unclear. Here is, let's just do, this is the way that you should react to impeachment. Let's do number 4. Good for John Fetterman. Here is how he reacted to the news that the Republicans were going to impeach Joe Biden.
Ask you about this news that Speaker McCarthy has formally launched an impeachment or has said he's going to.
Oh my God, really? Oh my gosh, it's devastating. Ooh, don't do it. Please don't do it. Oh no, oh no.
So we're gonna run back to the office, but
There you go. I think John Fetterman knows this is a big winner for Democrats. It should be interesting to see on what charges they're going to impeach Joe Biden. We're going to take a break in a moment, and when we do, we'll get back with Yohuru Williams and Michael Lansing. They are of the Public History Project, Overpoliced and Unprotected, Minneapolis, St. Paul. We'll get to that in just a moment. First, a couple of words from our sponsors. First off, every day on this program, I have at least a bottle of this. This is not just water. This is water with Liquid IV. What is Liquid IV? It is the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. I don't know. I've been doing this for now 3, maybe 4 years. I can't even remember. Literally 5 or 6 times a week, I will have at least a bottle of this. I will tell you right now, I'm going to have 2 bottles of it today. It is the only thing that is powering me through the show right now in terms of having COVID, staying hydrated. So important just in general, but particularly when you're ill. But if I was somebody who worked out in the morning, you want to stay hydrated. If it's something that you feel run down in the afternoon, you want to get rehydrated. If you're doing something like hiking or you're traveling a lot, there's never a time where it's not good to be hydrated. Liquid IV comes in 12 delicious, refreshing flavors to keep your hydration routine exciting. 1 stick of Liquid IV. They come in like little packets, maybe the size of a normal person's finger. And in 16 ounces of water, hydrates you 2 times faster and more efficiently than water alone. Contains 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C. It has 3 times the amount of electrolytes as leading sports drinks. It is made with quality ingredients, non-GMO, free from gluten, free from dairy and soy. They have now, I think it's 3 flavors that are sugar-free. Liquid IV believes that equitable access to clean and abundant water is the foundation of a healthier world. So they partner with leading organizations to fund and foster innovative solutions that help communities protect both their water and their futures. To date, also, Liquid IV has donated something like over 39 million servings in 50-plus countries around the world. Real people, real flavor, real hydrating. Grab your Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco or go to liquidiv.com, use the code MajorityRep at checkout, get 20% off. That's 20% off anything when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. Also, one of our sponsors today is one of my favorite ones. Right now, SunsetLakeCBD.com. At SunsetLakeCBD.com, all of their topical CBD products are going to be on sale right now. You can save 25% off on topicals and qualifying bundles when you use the code SMOOTH at checkout. So what's available? The Arnica and CBD rub, that you use for muscles. And I happen to use it for my eczema. Also, like skin lotion. It's the only skin lotion, and the unscented one, that I will put on my body. And really, to be honest with you, I only put it on my legs. Really, only on my calves. For some reason, my calves dry out. I know that's weird, but you can put it on your hands. You can put it anywhere. These handcrafted CBD topicals are great for every part of your body. Like I say, they're salve with arnica, they're lotion, the muscle rub with lidocaine for folks who need a little bit more relief. All really, really effective. Not only have they permanently reduced their prices on their most popular topicals, but today through the end of day tomorrow, that's Thursday, September 14th at 11:59 p.m., you can save an extra 25% with the code SMOOTH. For everything else, use the code LEFTISBEST. And not only will you get a discount, you will snag a sweet Majority Report theme sticker. So check that out, sunsetlakesebede.com. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Yohuru Williams and Michael Lansing right after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Yohuru Williams. He's a historian and founding director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas. Michael Lansing, professor of history at Augsburg University. They both have created the public history project Overpoliced and Unprotected in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Let's start with Yohuru. The first documentary, anyways, that you guys have done over at the Public History Project, and I want to we'll come around to this. Actually, let's start this with Michael. Let's talk about that first documentary. It starts in 1975. There's been a real problem policing in Minneapolis, St. Paul since at least then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And at Overpoliced and Underprotected, what Professor Williams and I are doing is trying to unearth, to recover, collect, and share these stories of unjust policing, as well as resistance to unjust policing that go back into the 1970s, 1960s, 1950s. We can keep going back and back and back all the way to the establishment of the police department in Minneapolis in the 1870s.
And so, Professor Williams, how does this set the table for what has been going on? Because I think, most people obviously have become more aware of the issues with the Minneapolis PD. The DOJ just, I guess in June, came out with a report that was pretty damning. Talk about the connection of this historical, existence of problems in this, and why this is important to understand where we are today.
I think it's absolutely critical for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, people just have a deep historical amnesia about the history of police reform in this community. It's not just Minnesota, it's nationally, but in Minneapolis in particular, that amnesia has been deadly in terms of how we think about reforming the police. And part of our project is to document those moments when there's conversation and concern over policing that ultimately ends up replicating some of the things that we're even seeing in our contemporary moment. We have an opportunity for a consent decree, and yet the other day, here's the union reasserting itself in that conversation. We have all the hopes and aspirations for reform placed on one or two individuals within the department. We saw that in the 1980s with Tony Boza. We're seeing it again in our contemporary moment with what's happening now with the new chief of police and a commissioner of public safety within the city of Minneapolis. So part of our project, as Michael shared, was to recover these stories, not solely as a cautionary tale, but hopefully to deepen and engage people in a larger conversation about what public safety looks like, and to move away from this model of policing, which ultimately has been quite problematic and quite deadly, particularly for communities of color and marginalized people in the Twin Cities.
Professor Lansing, what is it about history? Is it unique to this country? I mean, I once interviewed Gore Vidal about United States of Amnesia. And at the time, this was 20 years ago, and it was in the context of the Iraq War. And at the time, I really didn't fully understand what he was talking about, to be honest. And 20 years later, I'm an older guy. I realized, oh my God, people think George Bush was great. But I'm seeing it also in the context of things like Reconstruction. How much of this is just talk, I get there's a little bit ethereal maybe, but this process of how easily we forget the history. I mean, one would assume that people in Minneapolis know what's happened over the course of decades with their police department, but it seems like it's a revelation.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very common problem, a very common issue. In many ways, it defines how so many people in the United States experience the past. They experience it either through amnesia, which is the act of forgetting, or through memory making, which is the act of remembering certain things and forgetting others. We can think about how much our politics today are driven by nostalgia. For instance, you can argue that the whole idea of "Make America Great Again" is nothing but nostalgia, and nostalgia and memory are not history. Super important to understand that. But this dynamic of forgetting or choosing to forget or misremembering or only remembering certain things while forgetting others is as old as the country itself. It's absolutely crucial to understand that there's so much that is related to the past when we think about what our present is and what we want our future to be. The stakes are really high. And that's why you see, I would argue, so much nostalgia, so much amnesia, because partly it's human nature, to be sure, but when it's expressed collectively, whether we're talking about the mistreatment of people by police officers or a whole host of other issues facing the country and communities all across it, there's no question that we have to think about how Americans are thinking or not thinking about the past.
Professor Williams, is there are there things you can point to in terms of an attempt by, let's say, advocates of the police union, for instance, to obscure this? I mean, on some level, this is not a historical story. It is an ongoing story. It is just one that, I don't know, was it historical that there was a problem 3 years ago? Was it historical that there was a problem 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Or 2 months ago? At what point do you draw that line? This is a continuum, it seems like.
I think that's the line that we walk on our project as historians. Of course, we respect the fact that we're looking at the past, but we're hoping that it will illuminate in our contemporary moment ways that people could be thinking about addressing issues of police brutality and public safety reform in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities as a whole. Part of the question that you asked, Professor Lansing, I think animates our work in this sense. William Dean Howells famously told Edith Wharton when she was embarking on her literary career that what the American public always wants is a tragedy with a happy ending. And so we're very quick to want to write that happy ending. We saw it in Minneapolis in the aftermath of the conviction of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd, where you had the mayor come out and declare, George Floyd came to Minneapolis to better his life, but our community is better as a result. And it's kind of like all is done. And a week later, they're taking down George Floyd Square. And then 6-7 months later, we have the killing of, well, not even that long. We had the killing of Dante Wright. And then later on, Amir Locke was killed by Minneapolis police. So part of the problem is that desire to get to the after note without dealing with and kind of tackling the deeper issues of why these problems persist with regard to policing in the Twin Cities is the bigger issue. We saw this in the aftermath of Rodney King. It was asked to the chief of police at that time, John Locks, do you think it could ever happen here? And he said, of course not. We have, could happen anywhere, but he said, we have good training. As long as we have good training, we can avoid that. Well, we're now the epicenter in that conversation. Other communities have found themselves in this space in the past, what we do in the next few years and how important history is in terms of setting the foundations for that, as Michael shared, will be critical. Because if you don't know that history, you've got people essentially believing they're reinventing the wheel or doing something that's novel, when in fact they are replicating the harm that we've seen in the past. And we could talk, countless examples of that in terms of the introduction of technology as this is going to be what evens the playing field and creates equity in terms of policing. And all those have failed in the past, primarily for the reasons that we talk about in the project.
Yeah, I mean, just on that theme, right? I mean, I worked at a radio station that had 5 different ownerships over the course of 5 years, and I watched that same dynamic. They come in with the exact same sort of like, we're going to do this. And I'm like, well, actually, they tried that 6 months ago and it didn't work, but because they were new leadership. But how does that happen in the context of a city where like these reforms theoretically are observed publicly? If you're going to end up being in a position to institute these reforms, like, is there a lack of, is it just simply ignorance, or is it a lack of sincerity in terms of those who have the ability to impose reforms? Or is it the pushback they get from those reforms is so strong and sort of, buried that they can't call on resources, constituencies to support them in those reform movements?
I think all those things are at play, depending on the particular time, the particular moment. And as historians, what Professor Williams and I want to do, as soon as someone says, police reform, we want to talk about the history of reform. So we can talk about, here in Minneapolis, we can talk about the 19-teens, when for one mayoral term, between 1917 and 1918, you had socialists in the mayor's office in City Hall in Minneapolis. You had a socialist chief of police who encouraged police officers to unionize. That's actually the origins or birth of our local police union, right? And that was part of an effort to tamp down on graft and vice. It's like, let's pay these officers more. Let's give them better working conditions. Coming out of the labor movement, that is reform. That's part of the history of reform here. And of course, that would shock, that history, in fact, does shock many local residents who have seen the police union in the last 30 to 40 years be so profoundly active in politics at the local and state level, shaping public policy around public safety. That's just one example. And if we think about police reform, and this is what historians are saying all over the country, that this long history of police reform shows that very little actually changes in terms of the experiences of communities of color with the police, number one. And number two, it costs municipalities millions and millions of dollars. It actually, efforts to professionalize, efforts to reform, cost more money, and very little changes in terms of the experience of so many residents and citizens on the ground.
Professor Williams, I mean, have we...
Sam,
go ahead.
Just to Michael's last point, which is critical. He loves to frame this for audiences that we engage in the public around 2 questions that are absolutely essential to this discourse. Who is the public, and what counts as safety? And if we think about that through a historical lens, it actually illuminates a lot about when these moments go bad. Because are we talking about police, or are we talking about reforms that would be meaningful to those people like in Minneapolis in the 1980s, the LGBTQ plus community, which found itself on the receiving end of a great deal of police brutality in that moment, which was, part and parcel of what we're trying to kind of disclose here or get people to understand. Certainly African Americans and indigenous people there's a long history of police brutality with regard to those communities and here in the Twin Cities. The birth of the American Indian movement, AIM, which is modeled on the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, happens in Minneapolis because of the treatment of indigenous people by police in Minneapolis. So that history is absolutely essential. But those questions that Michael frames, I think for us are very important. And I think they're questions that communities have to ask themselves. When they put up a new precinct in 1985, the people that came out and they talked extensively about the business community and whom it would serve and how it would, they didn't talk about how African Americans and indigenous people experience policing in that community. And ultimately, those are the people who found themselves on the receiving end of that police brutality, on that invisibility, which is deadly. And again, the only time people seem to notice is when you have the loss of life, you have an Amir Locke, or you have a George Floyd, or you have a Dante Wright. But the reality is that even in those moments, if you're asking those questions, who is the public and what counts as safety, if you're not thinking about those groups as being part of the public, it really doesn't matter. You don't get the change you need in order to make real lasting reform.
That's I mean, I feel like that dynamic is a problem that we have when we assess, is the economy good? Because we will measure it based upon a certain subset of the American population. Is our healthcare good? We measure it by the fact that maybe princes from Saudi Arabia will come here to get healthcare, but it's not available to a wide range of people. So the point being that if you force people to reckon with the question, who is the community, they have to be aware that maybe they're not including large segments of what we would normally assume our community, and safety being for those people meaning something different than maybe, well, I'm trying to protect money in my bank, as opposed to like being able to have my kid go to the supermarket and not worry that they're going to get stopped by the cops for being black. And we only have a couple minutes here, but is it a wholesale failure of like the concept of reform that we're dealing with here? Or is it just that there is a superstructure that is specific to this institution that is, and maybe this is the same question from just a different ends, that is so resilient? Professor Lansing, why don't you take that?
Well, two things come to mind right away when you raise these issues and make those statements. One is that, policing in the United States is born in the 19th century from a variety of sources, and it is set up to preserve law and order in a profoundly inequitable and unequal place. The United States in the 19th century, right? We can think of all the people who are excluded in that space. And law and order is about keeping things the same. And so policing as an institution is built to do certain kinds of work, and you can try to change it. And of course, there have been innumerable efforts to change and transform and reform policing. But if you go back to the 19th century origins of policing, you get what you get, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind. The second thing that comes to mind, though, is, at Overpoliced and Underprotected and MSP, one of the things that Professor Williams and I do is we are always trying to talk about public safety, because too often public safety and policing are conflated. And in so many communities around this nation, including ours, public safety has been defined as policing, which of course is part of the problem. It's a significant piece of the problem, because if you're going to provide actual safety to the broadest understanding of the public, we need all kinds of things, including a broad range of social services, in order for our communities not just to survive, but to thrive. And as soon as we narrow the conversation to policing, we lose sight of that. So there are multiple ways in which policing itself is deeply flawed, even as our communities need and deserve public safety.
Professor Williams, just, as we've got to wrap this up, but if you could just expand on that notion in terms of I guess the idea is that if we sat down and said, the idea is we want public safety, and we were starting from a blank slate, the enterprise that we would create would not look like the enterprise that was created in the mid 1800s to basically subjugate a specific a group of people, even if that specific group of people may change over the course of time as to who fits that criteria. Give us a sense of what that would look like.
It would be a whole-scale reimagination of public safety. And it would begin with the premise of kind of looking at who makes up the community and what would constitute making all of us more safe. For example, very specific, mental health interventions would be a part of public safety. We think about, it's not my story to tell, but an infamous case from a few years back in Minneapolis, where a young mother threw both of her children off of a bridge, and unfortunately resulted in the death of one of those children. The police have been called to that home multiple times. Never were mental health professionals included in that call. So if you reimagine public safety around a range of interventions that begin with some of the basic things that we've seen introduced since the murder of Daunte Wright around traffic stops, Is it necessary to pull people over for broken taillights? Can that be administered a different kind of way? Can you have non-lethal interventions that involve people dealing with low-level issues in ways that, again, invite people into an understanding, a broader understanding of what keeps us all safe, as opposed to sending out the hammer, to always do what a hammer does. And that's what policing is set up to do. In fact, as my colleague Michael Lansing argues often, actually policing and its failure is the greatest success story in American history, because they are functioning exactly as intended. If we go back and look at the origins of policing and here in 1867 in Minneapolis, and policing Black and brown bodies is a big part of that work. They've been very successful in doing that. And again, I'm not laughing about that. I think that's deeply disturbing. But we would have to disrupt that completely, and that would mean a complete reimagination of what we mean by public safety, of which policing, in a way that we think about arrests and the use of physical violence, would be a very small part. It would not be the pie. Right now, it's the pie.
It's fascinating stuff. Yohuru Williams, historian, founding director at Racial Justice Initiative, University of St. Thomas, Professor Michael Lansing, history at Augsburg University. We will put a link to your public housing public history project, Overpoliced and Unprotected, MSP. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks so much.
We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to fill up these two. We're going to take a quick break. Thanks for your patience, folks. We are short-staffed, and even with that staff, at least one of us is at not at 100%. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Mario Ariza, investigative reporter at Floodlight News, who's going to talk to us about a referendum that is coming up in Maine. That is something that I've been, advocating for a long time, and that is essentially I'm going to ask him what we call it when a state essentially does its version of nationalization of its energy delivery grid. Essentially, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. I want to welcome to the program Mario Ariza, investigative reporter at Floodlight News. Mario, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Sam.
So there is a November referendum in Maine that is essentially going to determine the fate of two prominent, and maybe a couple more, but you'll tell me, electric utilities that would more or less be voted out of existence in Maine, at least in their current form, and ultimately replaced with a not-for-profit. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. The folks in Maine are going to get the chance to vote this November on whether or not to institute what is likely the largest public power takeover in the history of the United States if it passes. They have two utilities there. Note, these are only transmission utilities. They don't generate electricity. Called Central Maine Power and Versant Power. And if the vote passes, the process will begin where these two utilities will be purchased by the state of Maine, and they would be run as sort of a private-public partnership from now on.
So to be clear, they're not generating the power. They're just in charge of basically the transmission lines and charging you for this infrastructure that they built or bought.
Right. Poles and wires.
And why does Maine want to do this? I mean, I could think of a lot of reasons why one would want to do it, but what is like, how did this proposal come to be on the ballot?
It's a great question. The essence of it sort of boils down to Mainers being angry with their utility. They are dissatisfied with the service record of Central Maine Power, quite generally, right? Like, listen, Maine has a lot of trees, and you have a storm in Maine, the trees fall down. It's the most heavily forested state in the nation. And it takes a while to get that electricity hooked back up. So it's a challenging place for a poles and wires only utility to operate. But at the same time, Central Maine Power has had some very public snafus. They instituted a new electronic meter system back in 2017 that did not exactly go over very well. Portland Press Herald did a great investigation into how that messed up. And additionally, there's been some complaints about how slow this utility has been to connect solar to the grid. So it's kind of, a little difficult for Mainers at the moment. But additionally, Mainers aren't necessarily happy with the fact that this is a utility that's owned by a giant multinational holding company out in Spain called Iberdrola. And there's just a tiny little element of nativism to the campaign to get rid of them. Don't send our money to Spain kind of thing. So yeah, those are some of the main reasons why folks in Maine aren't necessarily happy with these utilities.
What's fascinating about it to me is this is not an ideological argument. This is purely, it seems to me, I mean, there's a little bit of nativism, as you say, but this is not an ideological argument. This is, we see a company whose job it is to essentially protect and service poles and wires. And it used to be, and I can tell you this, when I was a kid, the electric company would come out and would go through the neighborhood, and they would do this on a regular basis. I don't know if it was like once a year or whatever it was, and they would go and they would trim any trees that were near the power lines. They would do a lot of maybe preventative maintenance, I guess is what it would be called. And they basically, once these companies started to consolidate and have the pressure from Wall Street that they've got to deliver a certain amount, they basically said it's cheaper for us to wait until one of these trees, because we could either cut down 10 trees to avoid one of them falling on the wires, or we could wait until that one does and then just go fix the wires. That's going to be cheaper for us. But the cost associated with that is borne by the customers who don't have electricity for all those days. And that seems to be the dynamic that Mainers, there's other factors, but that seems to be a main problem with Maine, forgive the pun, with this setup. And this is one that's replicated all around the country, it seems like.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I'm not sure if that specific dynamic is what's going on at Central Maine Power. I don't have any evidence to say whether or not they've changed their maintenance paradigm because of pressure from their parent company for more profits. However, I can say that the Maine Public Utilities Regulatory Body has put some very stringent requirements on the company to increase and improve reliability measures. So it is something that folks over there are very concerned about and is not, they're kind of peeved about, shall we say, the Mainers are. But really, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said this isn't an ideological fight. And what I found really fascinating about writing about this particular instance is that it's really a discussion about who's going to lead, or a debate about who's going to lead the future of energy and renewable energy in Maine, because Maine already has one of the cleanest energy mixes in the country, right? It's a lot of hydropower, and it's a question about what the energy transition is going to look like and who would do that energy transition better, right? Is it these big investor-owned utilities that are answerable to their shareholders? Or is it this different system that the Mainers want to try and kind of build as the plane flies off the runway of this public power utility?
And to be clear, as you're saying, like, build this airplane as it's flying off the runway, the referendum itself calls for essentially a committee to build that airplane, right? I mean, it doesn't outline exactly what it's going to look like.
Yeah, so the referenda would be sort of like, if it passes, it would be like the starting gun of a very possibly long marathon beginning. Because what essentially has to happen for the state to take over this company or these companies is that the state and the companies would have to agree on a price between the two. How much is it worth? Because we have to buy you out. We can't just take your stuff. This isn't Venezuela. And at the end of the day, that negotiation and those court battles, could take 10 years. So this could become very costly. It could go off very smoothly, depending. I don't know. It depends on how, gently into the good night CMP and Versant want to go. But then you'd have to figure out what running that utility for almost 1 million customers would look like. You'd have to get basically a private operator to run it, and then you'd have an elected council overseeing the private operator.
And I would, if I had to bet, I would say that this private operator is going to be one or two of these two companies that would be then like, look, you have a new business. Here's your new business is that you're doing exactly what you did before, but we're just going to direct your operations in a different way. And I would imagine we can look at these companies' books and say, this is what profits are. And all of a sudden you can have those profits, and instead of that being profits, just reinvest it into providing better service for customers.
Yeah, so I don't know who would end up running these, who would be the system operator, shall we say. I don't know if CMP or Versant has expressed any interest in that. They may not necessarily want to tip their hand. But, one of the main differences here is the incentive structure that would exist, right? Right now, the utilities the privately owned utilities, they make profit by increasing the pot of money that they have. Right? They make profit by putting more capital into the quote unquote rate base. The more poles and wires that there are, the more guaranteed profit they get on that total bag of money.
That's because because it's a very highly regulated business, and you get essentially like cost plus 10, for example.
Exactly. Or if you're in Alabama, it's almost 14%.
Okay.
With this structure, it would be pretty different. Right, you would have a very, very different incentive structure. If the public power thing happens, for that operator to make profit. Right, he would make profit. I don't know, off of a series of other benchmarks. But essentially, it would also be a lot cheaper for the state of Maine to be able to borrow money to improve its transmission networks to increase reliable energies. One of the arguments, renewable energy is one of the arguments that people are making. When they're talking about this thing as if they want to vote for it. Because, it's a lot cheaper to borrow money as a government than it is to borrow money as a private corporation. So that's sort of the central argument at the moment.
And let's just touch on the enormous amount of money that is pouring in to defend private ownership of, I don't know if you have an argument as to like why the marketplace can handle this better than a government. I'm open to it, but they're so highly regulated. They have no competition. There's nothing about a market that's going on here. It seems to me, it's just essentially like we have one private monopoly acting in the interests of shareholders, or we could have one government monopoly acting in the interests of people who could theoretically vote them out of office.
I mean, that's one way to structure the argument. Sure. I listen, what I found really fascinating about writing about Maine is that usually a lot of these utility political operations happen in the shadows, right? For example, here in Florida, you look at Ohio, utilities often use a lot of dark money that's really hard to trace, and election laws in these states aren't necessarily the best for transparency. Maine has some of the most amazing election laws I've ever seen when it comes to transparency. I mean, like, as an investigative reporter, I love these things because you can literally figure out where these dudes went to lunch. It's great. And so you can see the structure of how these companies make their argument to the public, and you can critique that argument because as a reporter, you can say, well, they're saying this, but that's not necessarily that accurate, right? So that's why this was a lot of fun for me. Now, this is a gobsmacking amount of money for Maine, which has like 1.3 million people. We're talking over $18 million since May, right? I don't know how much that's increased. We're in September now. The election's ramping up. It's probably higher. It's certainly higher. And these companies, you know, on the one hand, you can say, my God, shouldn't they be putting this into the rate base to improve service? And on the other hand, if, you know, you're a pension fund who owns stock in these companies, you're like, wait a second, this is a fight for their lives. Spend, boys, spend. Right? So there's two arguments to that. But what I find really fascinating about following this in Maine is that so often in the US, big corporations get to make arguments to the people, and they get to do so quietly, right? They get to hide their hands. You don't necessarily know who's pumping the dark money into the C4, that's making the mailers, that's putting the Facebook ads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here in Maine, you know, you can see it. And I think that's great, right? I think that transparency as a reporter is good for people making their own decisions. It helps me help them make decisions.
Do we have a sense of like what Mainers are thinking about this? I mean, do we have a sense of how much that is that dynamic is helping clarify things for folks?
I'll give two instances, and this is also why I'll give two anecdotes, and this is also why Maine is so fascinating, because it's not ideological. It like cuts across party lines, right? You'll have a lot of Republicans who want to vote against or want to get rid of Central Maine power, and a part of the Democratic Party establishment in Maine is fighting to keep this thing alive. It's very fascinating. But so in Maine, I heard accounts that when the Central Maine or the people who were gathering ballot signatures to get this on the ballot, to get rid of the utility, they'd go to a state fair, they'd hear people yell out, F Central Maine power, of course I'm going to sign, right? Like, people really don't like this utility in parts of Maine. It doesn't have a good brand identity. But there's also former legislators, I think she was a Republican that I spoke to, who for free of charge, right? Some legislators are getting paid to advocate, but for free of charge have gone out and advocated against getting rid of Central Maine power because they genuinely don't think it's a good idea. They say, hey, we're basically signing on to like an unfunded liability here, an structured liability.
Interesting. Well, Mario Ariza, Floodlight News, we'll link to Floodlight News, and if you have any other pieces, Bradley will post them as well.
We've got one coming out this Friday, which I think you folks may be interested in. I'll send it to you when it's out.
All right, great, and we will link to that as well. A really interesting story. Appreciate you coming on today.
My pleasure, Sam. Thanks so much.
All right, folks, and on the IM here, Art Vandelay tells me if you're in Maine and you're interested in supporting Pine Tree Power would be essentially the public version of the existing two major electricity delivery companies, for lack of a better term that is on the top of my head. Pine Tree Power is looking for canvassers. They are completely outspent. I mean, just enormous dynamic here. There are Zoom information sessions every Tuesday night, and they're looking for canvassers. You can go to pinetreepower.org for more information. We will put that in the YouTube and podcast description as well. pinetreepower.org in Maine. It's going to be a long process. It would be a great example for the rest of the country, frankly. There is absolutely, in my mind, no argument as to why. Then I would be more aggressive in sort of taking, we have a take. We know that governments can take private property if there is a legitimate public reason, if these folks are fairly compensated. For me, I'd have this all wrapped up in 6 months. But it's not me. But head to our blog and YouTube and pinetreepower.org if you want to get involved there. All right, we're going to take a quick break and head into the fun half of the program. Again, fun half will be a little shortened today. It wasn't even that shortened yesterday. I don't know, an hour and 15 minutes. Like, I'm trying to keep it short.
Yeah, we went till 2. We went after 2, I think. We did pretty good.
Because I am not at 100%. I'm not going to lie. Even at 70%, though, I'm doing a show longer than, people are at 110%.
That's right.
Folks, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free half free of commercials, you get the fun half as well. You can IM the show if you're a member. All of this is always available through the app. It's free to everybody, majorityapp.com. Also, check out the AM Quickie at amquickie.com. Sign up. You get 3 emails a week for free. Then if you want it every day, we've got a premium subscription on that email newsletter. That is it's really just a service for us. That has been a money-making loser for 5 years now. I don't know. Since pre-COVID. What am I doing? I'm going to take a business course or something. But once I start something, I can't turn it off, even if it doesn't make any sense. Also, shop.majorityreportradio.com. That's our merch store. That is a cash cow. We sell so many t-shirts and Majority Report hats and tchotchkes. Check it out. shop.majorityreportradio.com. What's the word? Is Emma coming in? Is Emma going to do the show tomorrow?
Yeah, I think we will, in some capacity, definitely still needing to iron out entirely what we're doing. I believe we will have some form of ESPN tomorrow to discuss the extremely eventful week 1 of NFL action and give our picks for the week 2 action. So youtube.com/ESPN show for more info, and also keep an eye on our Twitter feed at ESPN show as well for more updates on that. And also Matt was able to join David for Left Reckoning last night. They spoke
Matt
with Kurt.
Was on Left Reckoning last night.
It seems that he made it. It seems that he was able to make a return appearance. So they spoke with Kurt Hackbarth, who's a Mexico-based journalist, to talk about President Obrador, his potential successor, and a little bit more from there. So youtube.com/Left Reckoning and patreon.com/Left Reckoning to access the post game.
Okay, folks, quick break. We'll be right back. 646-257-3920. We'll turn on the phones. I don't know, probably about 5-10 minutes.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun.
Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflakes has what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs that look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males...
Psych. Fuck them. Snowflake says what?
What?
Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Fun half, ladies and gentlemen. So fun. Let's go to the IMs. Moody Monkey, another day. Thank you for sacrificing comfort to bring us great news and content. You are welcome. 502 Drew. Mark Maron had Naomi Klein on WTF recently, and you got name dropped a few times. Oh, that's very sweet. Majority Report wardrobe coordinator Sam reads a headline about boosters being recommended for everyone. Well, there's something that could have been brought to my attention yesterday. I said that yesterday. 3 weeks too late. Bo from South Dakota. Can I get a shofar for my 2-year-old? We're in the emergency room as he had a seizure this morning. Oh, running test, but I think the worst is behind us. Oh, gosh. Hang in there. I'm so sorry to hear that. Nothing worse when your kid is sick. Bobby Digital. Sammy, the best kind of apple is the Granny Smith. Book it. That type of thing, honestly, will get you barred from the show. F your Yankee Blue Jeans. Hi, Sam. I'm a public school teacher, and I'm homesick with COVID, too. It's nice to commiserate. Get well soon. Left is best. Thank you. I'm woking from home. Hey, Sam, just checking on how you doing. I've got the Saudis here. Dude, make me look cool. Toma Flink. Happy Friends Day Wednesday. Hope Emma and Matt get well soon. Here in Britain, the Labour Party has ruled out wealth tax and has been talked about approvingly by Chuck Grassley. Please make it stop. Also, the date of the next ESPN episode is understandably uncertain. The Men's Rugby World Cup started last Friday. It's pretty much Ireland's, France's, or New Zealand's to lose. The England head coach is serious risk of being fired, although their relatively decent game against Argentina suggests it's not over yet. Militant apathy. Boebert getting kicked out of Beetlejuice. The play is so on brand, just like when Sarah Palin's entire family got into a huge brawl. Someone should do a deep dive into the pathology of Republican women. World Star. Police culture is so tied up in controlling black bodies because white people, even some liberal white pepper, subconsciously feel that they need a buffer against black rage. Same reason why the state of South Carolina built the Citadel within the cannon range of the black area of Charleston. Interesting. As long as Comstat rewards tickets for minor traffic stops and BS citizen contacts, police will keep doing it. It's low-hanging fruit. Kowalski, Sam, I need new shoes. Get a shoe sponsor. According to my AI software, Sam is running at 69%. Nice. Douglas, folks, this is the best thing ever. A gerontocratic senator reading aloud from banned books. Okay, yes, we've got that clip. I'll get to that in a moment. Let's do this. Matt Gaetz. No, let's just go into the. Let's go into this. Okay. There has been a Senate hearing on book banning. Understand, like, books have been banned all across the country now. The writing of Frederick Douglass. I mean, we just go on and on. The way that they're justifying this is that there are apparently 2 books that exist that kids in middle school, again, you're over the age of 12, have access to in the libraries. They don't trust librarians to be able to provide these books. And understand, these 2 minutes that they're reading from these books are moments within the books. Here is, which one came first, Bradley?
Max Eden came first.
This is Max Eden, a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, trying to protect our kids.
Material to children by public employees. This is a question of judgment. Few would say it's unreasonable to keep Hustler with its close-up genital photographs out of school libraries, and few would insist that Romeo and Juliet, with its lyrical allusions to sex, should be removed. Communities must draw the line somewhere between those 2 points. But where exactly? Take the previously mentioned book, Genderqueer. That graphic novel famously includes a picture of a strap-on dildo blowjob. Is this okay for kids? Some think that it is, and some think that it isn't. You know something weird is going on, though, when parents try to read passages of these books at school board meetings, and the school board cuts them off because they insist the material is too obscene to be read out loud. I guess kids could be listening? Great for them to read, but unacceptable for them to hear? I think that's the principle, maybe. It's kind of gross.
I can explain what the principle is. When you take a book out of the library and you decide to read it, you are making a decision to read it. When you are in a public forum and you're listening to that forum, when somebody starts reading something that's explicit, you don't have the same control over that. I guess theoretically you could turn it off, but if you're actually located in the building, what are you going to have to run out of the room? This is very different. I mean, I think this is a fairly straightforward concept. I can make a personal choice for me. I can't necessarily make that choice without informed consent. I guess if you were to say, like, at the meeting tonight, some parents going to try and read off stuff that some people may find offensive. Don't come if you don't want to hear that. I think that's fair. I think that's called a trigger warning. which these same people mock you for offering. All right, but go back. Let's listen to this guy because he's about to now, so protective of our children, read this in a public area.
And the school board cuts them off because they insist the material is too obscene to be read out loud. I guess kids could be listening. Great for them to read, but unacceptable for them to hear. I think that's the principle, maybe. It's kind of gross to say, and I don't want to, but this hearing has been called, and we really can't have an honest discussion without knowing what we're actually talking about. We're talking about books with explicit passages about fisting, butt plugs, analingus, the spit or swallow decision, and rape. I won't read those verbatim, but I will read a passage from a few of the most banned books. From the fourth most banned, All Boys Aren't Blue. You were fully erect at this point. You promised that you're not going to tell anyone? I promised. You then grabbed my hand and made me touch it. It was the first time I'd ever touched a penis that wasn't my own. I knew that what was happening wasn't supposed to happen. Cousins weren't supposed to do these things with cousins. And from the also fourth most banned, Lawn Boy. In the fourth grade at a church youth group meeting, out in the bushes behind the parsonage, I touched Doug Goebel's dick, and he touched mine. In fact, there were even some mouths involved. 10-year-olds performing sodomy, underage incest, strap-on dildo blowjobs. Is this okay for kids?
Well, define what kids are. I don't think that kids like under the age of, let's say, 12 or 13, but I think kids who are seeking this out at age 13, yeah, I think that's okay. I think that's okay. And particularly if they're reading the whole book to get to that passage, it's good for kids to read. But that wasn't enough. The Republicans really, really like these two clips of these books. Here is, and trigger warning, I'm offering it right now. Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, in questioning Alexi Giannalis, the Illinois Secretary of State, I guess. Here he reads some passages from those same books. They really like these books from an electoral standpoint.
I confess I'm a little confused, and I appreciate the argument or discussion that we've been having, but for me, it's a little too conceptual or, I don't know, metaphysical or theological or whatever you want to call it. I want to try to understand what you're asking us to do.
I like how he, I don't know, some of these big words. Where did he go to school? Was it Yale or was it Harvard?
He's Harvard, but he's also a Rhodes Scholar, just to be clear. Yeah.
Well, some of these big words, I don't know.
I never heard those at Oxford.
Yeah. If I don't hear him with a British accent, I can't quite get my mind around it. Here we go.
A little too conceptual or, I don't know, metaphysical or theological or whatever you want to call it. I want to try to understand what you're asking us to do. Let's take two books that have been much discussed. The first one is called All Boys Aren't Blue, and I will quote from it. I put some lube on and got him on his knees, and I began to slide into him from behind. I pulled out of him and kissed him while he masturbated. He asked me to turn over while he slipped a condom on himself. This was my ass, and I was struggling to imagine someone inside me. He got on top and slowly inserted himself into me. It was the worst pain I think I have ever felt in my life. Eventually, I felt a mix of pleasure with the pain. Close quote. All Boys Aren't Blue. The second is another much discussed book. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's called Genderqueer. Okay. Let me read an excerpt from that. Quote, I got a new strap-on harness today. I can't wait to put it on you. It will fit my favorite dildo perfectly. You're going to look so hot. I can't wait to have your cock in my mouth. I'm going to give you the blowjob of your life. Then I want you inside of me. End quote. Now, Mr. Secretary, what are you asking us to do? Are you suggesting that only librarians should decide whether the two books that I just referenced should be available to kids? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay. Tell me.
I think it's legitimate for librarians to decide what's going to be in the library. Well, obviously, there should be oversight because you don't want librarians deciding that the only book that can be in the library is the Bible or an annotated Bible or commentary on the Bible. But, you know, if you're really concerned about what is age appropriate, go ask the experts. The problem is these people were the same people who were arguing 15 years ago we should be teaching kids abstinence only, period. They lost that battle because everybody's like, you sound like a right-wing religious fundamentalist fanatic, because they are. And this is just the extension of this, and they don't care what else gets banned in there. And frankly, they probably are, while we're at it, let's get rid of all this new books about the Civil War that have been published over the past 2 decades, basically reminding people that it was about slavery. I mean, that's what's the name of the game here is. And, you know, the reason why they read this stuff off. Now, I mean, how many more kids are able to hear those words now than would have been able to read them in the past?
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that they're almost like, it's almost like Streisand affecting these books, right? Like, I can only imagine that probably sales or recognition or searches of these books are probably only increasing. And also, as you said, Sam, like, they're the ones that are doing what Max Eden said, which is like, if you were to read this aloud, someone would try and stop you at like a public forum. Like, people reading these books, as you said, reading is like a solitary pursuit. There isn't widespread evidence that middle school teachers are reading this aloud as if it's like a picture book to their students.
No, absurd.
It's 12 or 13-year-olds personally reading something. And they are the ones that are actually conveying it to a larger audience than the kids that might have been checking it out from the library and reading it at home.
Yeah, and Left or Bereft makes the point that you can be 13 or 14 and be forced to carry a pregnancy.
Right. That might be legal.
From a rape, or not for that matter. But the idea that you could read about a sex act at that age, that's crazy.
That's beyond the pale. Yeah.
Beyond the pale. You're old enough to be a parent. You're just not old enough to read about gay sex. Unbelievable. That witness did go on. That clip is a little longer. At one point he goes, I know that was disturbing for everybody, particularly hearing you read it. I'm just a country boy who happened to be a Rhodes Scholar. I just don't think this is 93 anymore. And the idea, like, back when Tipper Gore and Joe Lieberman trying to get, explicit lyrics from songs, and we were being told that that was the death knell of society. It's all gone away. I'll tell you what the death knell of society is. All this women's lib. It's allowing them to get divorced when they want to. Here's Steven Crowder with his sidekick and Mug Club CEO, Gerald Morgan. The recently dumped Steven Crowder is mad still that his own wife had the ability to say, I don't want to live my life with this abusive idiot, and walk away. And he's mad that his money wasn't able to, that he didn't have the ability to force her to stay and be his wife.
It's not that you're missing something, it's that there's more out there.
Well, you're going to have your own money, especially if you get divorced. Because now it's your money.
Oh,
yeah.
Isn't that wonderful? There's an incentive for women to leave in California, states like that, right? With no fault. Something you guys may not know about no fault divorce. I don't know if you know this. It was pushed by Hugh Hefner in the pornography industry, Dr. Kinsey, because they didn't want men to be punished for cheating. Back in the day before no fault, if a man cheated, he still had to give up half. If a man abused a woman, he had to give up half. If that didn't happen, it was considered abandonment. So the fault was either infidelity, abuse, or abandonment. Then they said, let's do no fault. So that way men are not going to be corralled. They're not going to have to limit their natural sexual proclivities. And then feminism also merged with it. And it was, oh, no, hold on a second. It's always the fault of the primary earner. A lot of people don't realize this. No fault was pushed by people who wanted men to be able to cheat fault-free. There was always a fault. Cheating, abuse, or abandonment. Pick one. But it's women like Radikowski. I hope that I'm saying that right.
Ratatouski,
yes.
Ratatouille. Got it.
I love when she cooks under the hat.
She hasn't cooked, dude. Come on. She has money and she's hot.
That's what gross women do.
Yeah. That's what married women in their 30s do.
I have my Uber Eats. Ooh, the delivery driver was foreign, but it's okay. So
I'm 90% sure, by the way, she pushed Fire Festival as well. She was one of the models that actually pushed that stuff. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, good for her.
So no accountability either.
No, not at all.
But Radikowski is the kind of person who, unfortunately, with the lie, has the ear of young women.
So they're talking about this. I guess she's like an actress or Instagram influencer. I don't know, who just got divorced. He's mad about no-fault divorces because it liberated people from being required to be married when they didn't want to be, or they just didn't want to be. And he sort of realizes at one point that, like, oh, wait a second. The way to deal with that would be to require the primary earner to support the other person. And he's mad about his divorce settlement. Divorce settlements are never fun. Well, I don't know. But I would imagine they're never fun. In my experience, it wasn't fun. But particularly in Crowder's instance, where his now ex-wife wasn't even allowed to use the car without his permission. I would imagine the idea of her pursuing a career was never on the table for her to be able to make her own money, because as you could see from just like that one brief Ring video that she released, him being abusive to her, the idea of him controlling her was so key to that dynamic, to that relationship, that the idea that she could have her own money, buy her own car, no, he was in charge of everything. The one thing I will say about Crowder is usually guys don't get as right-wing as he does until the divorce, when they realize, like, oh, my wife theoretically has the same amount of rights as I do. And that's when they become Crowder. Crowder was already there. That was the dynamic he had there. Amazing. Going to turn on the phones. We'll take calls. I think I got another half hour with me. The number is 646-257-3920, 646-257-3920. One of the things about that no-fault divorce, too, we just had reports on what 2020, 2021, 2022 looked like. It really is amazing. Through 2022, not in 2023, but people's incomes fell. It's to be expected. 2021, 2021, 2022, during COVID, people's incomes dropped. But in 2021, the poverty rate decreased dramatically. And we've talked about this multiple times in the past. But it shot up in 2022. The poverty rate decreased dramatically because of all the support that the American government provided for people. The poverty rate for children was 5.2% in 2021. It was something like 16% in 2020. It is now back up to 12.4%. I've been saying this a lot, but all this data just came out. We made the decision as a country to essentially drop 7% of our population, kids, back into poverty. We did the same thing too with pulling back on the COVID support for daycare centers. We've seen women's participation in the workforce get to an all-time high. Their wages also have risen relative to men. But all that support's going away, and you're going to see tens of thousands of daycare centers close over the next 6 months because we're pulling the support of that program. And let's be clear, this is all because Joe Manchin, arguably Kristen Sinema, decided they didn't want to include this in the bill. Bernie Sanders had a standalone version that lost dramatically too, I think, in the Senate. Really stunning. Really stunning. Let's go to the phones for a second. Number 646-257-3920. Calling from a 916 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Emmett. I am calling from Phoenix, Arizona.
Emmett from Phoenix, Arizona. What's on your mind?
First, really quick, shout out to the authors of The Big Myth you had on the show a few months ago. Read the book. Excellent. Recommended to everyone. The thing that I've had on my mind is student debt forgiveness. I'm generally a really progressive person. Totally support the idea of a universal free college for everyone. That just seems like a no-brainer for a modern society. I honestly, though, I've listened to several discussions here on the show about student debt forgiveness, and I don't quite understand yet. I don't feel like I can defend it as a progressive.
You don't feel like you can defend student debt forgiveness as a progressive?
Yeah, it's like if there are instances where someone was misled, right, when they...
Did you have a problem with the child tax credit?
No, to me, like, socialism for kids makes 100% sense.
No, it's not just socialism for kids, right? It's not just socialism for kids.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the parents who made the decision to have the kids. And you get $300 per kid.
Totally.
How is that
To me, it's
how's
a
that any
no-brainer.
different in your mind? You have people who made the
A lot
decision.
of people have student debt.
You have people who made the decision to have kids.
And they sign up for the debt. Like, they knew what they were getting into. People didn't know what they were getting into. 100%. Then there should be. They should get help.
But let me ask you this.
Predatory loaners take advantage of people.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
How is it different from having kids and then the government provides $300 a month per kid support for you when you didn't know that was going to happen when you had the kid?
I'm not sure I follow. Just
okay. Do you know what the child tax credit
in lots
is?
of different ways.
Do you know what the child tax
Yeah,
credit?
yeah.
Okay. During COVID, and there was an attempt by the Biden administration to extend it, you received a $300 essentially allowance per child, or up to $300 per child on a monthly basis, $3,600 a year per child. Did you have a problem with that?
No, I think that's a great idea to keep kids and families with kids out of poverty.
Okay. But it's not just for, it wasn't for poverty. You got $300 up to like $140,000 a year. But to be clear, when these people had the children, they didn't know they were going to get $300 from the government. They signed up for kids.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point.
And then I would say also, in terms of the benefit to the economy, there's no argument as to whether it's a benefit to the economy. Everybody says it is. And one of the biggest reasons why we had so few housing starts for so long was because of student debt. But also, on top of which, the amount of interest accrued became almost impossible to pay back. Also, I would say,
Emma had that guess.
Yeah, and I would add,
Emma had that guess a few weeks ago. She had started with like 30K in the 80s, and she's like a lawyer, and now she has almost 300K or something crazy today. So yeah, stuff like that absolutely needs to be
I'll tell you
fixed.
something. I have a kid who just went to college. The idea that she understands the implications, and she's smart. But the idea that she understands the implications of taking out that loan, I wouldn't be so quick to make that assessment, with all due respect to her.
Yeah. Oh yeah, a lot of these people taking out student loans are borderline children, to be sure.
Well, it's not borderline children. I mean, at age 17, the idea that you could make that type of financial planning
legally.
Also, I would add, do we not as a society have a societal interest in educating as many of our population as well as we can?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said before, 100% support education, college education being free in the first place.
Well, okay, but we can't do that we can't do that for, whatever it is, 50 million Americans at this point. So the argument is like, on some basis of fairness, we shouldn't do it?
I just would say, well, I'll just respond to what you've said already. I think that makes a lot of sense if the idea is the nature of the economy and the job market, things like the recession and the pandemic have just disrupted what everyone was expecting so thoroughly that it's no longer fair or sensible
I don't
to
even know if
expect
it's
all these people who are children to pay back their loans.
It's not contingent. My argument's not contingent on the pandemic. Let me ask you this.
Okay.
Do you think it's fair as a progressive that rich people don't have to have any student debt? That students whose parents are rich don't have to have any student debt as they go out into the world and fashion their lives?
No, definitely not. I think we should not make whether or not people can access a good quality college education contingent on how rich their parents are. Totally agree.
I think we agree on the idea that we want a free version of college available to everybody. What do we do for the tens of millions of people whose lives are so constrained in terms of what they can do, what they're allowed to achieve, what pursuits they can follow based upon their student debt? What do we do about them at this point?
Yeah, if we can, I think it'd be great to forgive the debt. I guess part of me feels like I believe in the power of government and collective action. If we're going to throw a bunch of money at a problem, though, we have so many different problems we can throw money at and a limited amount of money to spend. So there needs to be a good public return for everyone.
What is the limitation?
Theoretically, at some point, right? I mean, if we divested some money from our military, we would have basically unlimited money, to be sure.
Do you know that the government is going to go broke in 17 days?
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, as we do on an annual basis, our representatives can make a decision. They can either pass the $880 billion defense budget or not. They can pass all the other discretionary spending. I guess my point is that you and I don't have control over. I mean, let's just for a moment stipulate that we need to shift money from one place to another to provide for the college to student loan debt. I don't think we actually need to do that, but let's just stipulate it so that we're not getting into a complicated conversation about it. The point is,
we certainly could. Like, I would say, hey, raise taxes, do whatever you need to do. Like, if it feels like it's worth spending the money on, we can get the money.
What's most popular? I mean, the fact is that relieving of student debt is very popular as far as things go. And for those people, it's going to be really popular. If you want that transfer of wealth, the best thing to do is provide that relief for people and then force your lawmakers to figure out where they get the money from.
Yeah. Could you tell me more? You were saying that it's a drag on the economy having a bunch of student debt.
Of course.
Because that to me sounds like a really strong, compelling case, and I haven't heard that yet.
All right. Let's say you want to buy a new car. What's your name again? Emmett. Let's say you want to buy a new car. The car cost $40,000 or $25,000 or whatever it is. Let's say your car payments are $300 or $400 a month. And I don't know, you make $2,500 a month. You have low rent, but you can just pay that $300 or $400. What if I say to you, actually, you can't because you also owe $400 a month in college loans? If I take that college loan payment away, you're more likely to buy that car. The president of the Home Builders Association back 5-6 years ago said the number one inhibiting factor to the building of new homes is that first-time buyers are inhibited because of student loans. I mean, it's just basic economics. If I don't have to pay for a loan, that loan, incidentally, it doesn't create anything. My paying that off. There's no economic activity associated with that except for maybe the servicer gets a fee. But there's nobody, the baker doesn't see, the baker's not going out and hiring anybody because he's not spending that money on bread. The car manufacturer is not making more cars and paying their workers more who are going out and spending stuff at the bakery because that's not where that money's going. That's
so
why.
By that reasoning, why not just say give every American a check for 20, 30, 40K? And if you have student debt, great, you can use that to pay it down. If you don't have student debt, you can use that for something else.
I mean, to be honest with you, I don't have that much of a problem with that.
Sure, I mean, UBI is based for sure.
I mean, if we don't get rid of other programs, if that's what it would take.
I guess I support, in theory, student debt, but it just feels like an incomplete half measure. Like, okay, if we believe in this, we should just go straight to UBI or straight to universal debt forgiveness.
I mean, I don't. It is an incomplete measure, but we should also have universal health care. But the fact that we don't have universal health care and single payer health care is not a reason for me to say that we shouldn't have student loan debt forgiveness. I got to jump. Appreciate the call.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Calling from a 262 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 262. 262. Nope. 262 is Gonzo. Calling from 518. 518.
Is this me?
Yeah.
Oh my God, Sam, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing? Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Orcon calling from Albany, New York.
Orcon from Albany, New York. What's on your mind?
Well, I had to tell you a story that happened. There was a family memorial service for my grandmother that passed, and we all get together around the barbecue table, got some good food, but my sister brought her girlfriend over, and it was such a weird interaction. My mom, out of nowhere, we're talking about TikTok, and then of course Dylan Mulvaney gets brought up, and my mom, out of nowhere, just points at my sister and her girlfriend, says, I hope you both know and stand with me that Dylan Mulvaney is a fraud and not a woman. And then it gets into this big argument with my sister and my mom. And it devolves so quickly that my sister's girlfriend breaks down crying, and the table goes silent for 2 minutes. And finally, she has the courage to tell her story about, and looks at my mom and says, that rhetoric is what my mom said to me in Korea. How just people can't openly be who they are. And, how she goes into the story about how her mom put a knife in her hand and wanted her to kill herself. But it was terrible. And I needed to call in and just emphasize the fact that trans rights are human rights. And I feel like a lot of people, even though they say they're pro-gay relationships, just fail to recognize that it's a continual struggle for the LGBTQ community. And I'm looking for any advice as well, how we could bridge the gap for middle-aged Americans, the boomers, on trans issues, when they say they don't have hate in their heart but lash out so viscerally.
Well, how did your mom react to that?
Well, it's funny because she is religious, but it stemmed more from a fear of losing women's rights, and that any recognition of trans rights is somehow taking away from women's rights and the struggle that women have had and continue to have in America.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a line deployed by a lot of transphobes, some of whom I would imagine really don't believe that whatsoever. I mean, I guess the idea that, I have a vague notion of what that critique is. I don't think it holds much weight anymore. The idea that the existence of trans men somehow will diminish the patriarchy in and of itself.
Yeah.
I think the bottom line is, I'm curious as to how your mom just sort of reacted to the idea of these the idea that gender, I mean, this is all sort of around the concept of gender, right?
Right.
Because if you're gay or lesbian, you are bending the norms that society has established for gender. You're supposed to be involved with someone of the opposite gender. If you are trans, then you are altering your gender. The bottom line is like at the end of the day, there was a time where mothers would give a knife to their daughter who said that they were lesbian. And in many respects, you know, we have a similar dynamic in some places with trans kids. And I think like, I don't know that we're going to really change the minds of too many boomers or, you know, even Gen Xers on the cusp. But I think like stories like that would do it. And frankly, then it's just a matter of time.
No, I'll tell you what happened after. I mean, the dinner wasn't a complete waste. The mac and cheese was amazing. So the barbecue wasn't a total wash. But, you know, after they go upstairs and then we're all sitting, you know, talking about, oh my God, like, how could you say that? Blah, blah, blah. Then they come down and it opened up the discussion, you know, a little back and forth. So it became more civil. But my mom's telling me, you know, this happened last week, that she feels like she ruined her relationship with her daughter. And I'm like, well, you might have. That was unsolicited and completely out of left field. But I think it led to a broader discussion of how rhetoric like that, like you don't even know what you're saying. And I used a quote my friend sent me. You know, not every person that voted for Donald Trump is a white supremacist, but every white supremacist voted for Donald Trump.
Right.
Now, you might not say that with hate in your heart, Mom, but people with hate in their heart use that language against people as a knife that they don't understand or agree with.
But I will say this: I think like your mom is probably on a journey, and that may have been, you know, one of the beginning steps of it. So I would, I'm curious. Call back in a couple of months and let me know where she's at.
Okay.
Appreciate the call.
No, we'll do. Absolutely.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. Just got a couple of minutes left here. Oh, let's do, what should we do? Should we do this Walter Isaacson?
Yeah, sure, if you want to.
Folks, we're not going to have any more time for calls. I'm sorry. I can't do a full tune. I can't go to 2:30 today. Let's do this, Walter Isaacson. This, you know, a story from last week, but apparently Walter Isaacson has written Elon Musk's biography. And it came out. Do we have the original, the original quote from Walter Isaacson?
Yeah,
in this book? He writes that within, and listen, I know there's, you know, within the context of this audience, there's a wide range of perspective on how much support the United States government should give to the Ukrainian people who are trying to repel an invasion of their country by the Russians. Put that aside for a moment and make this more about the issue of like what a billionaire could do. Let's just assume that, like, I don't know, just to make it very stark, okay, that there was a delivery by a ship from one country to provide, let's say, humanitarian relief to the Palestinians. And they were going in to try and navigate into Gaza, to the shores, to provide all sorts of relief for people living in the Gazan Strip, because they basically live in an open-air prison that Israel sort of blockades. And let's say this service is provided by, commissioned, right, by this government. But a billionaire would have the chance of saying, like, well, you know what? I think it would upset the Israelis. And it might make them punish the Gazans more. I'm going to click this off. Understand, like, the power that a billionaire has. Far too great. Here's what Walter Isaacson wrote originally in his biography. This is amazing. Pop this up on the screen. Here it is. Talking about Ukrainians that were headed to striking Russia. Throughout the evening into the night of the strike, he personally, speaking of Musk, he personally took charge of the situation, Isaacson writes, this is a quote, allowing the use of Starlink for the attack, he concluded, would be a disaster for the world. So he secretly told his engineers to turn off coverage within 100 kilometers of the Crimean coast. This is as Ukrainians were going to strike in Crimea. As a result, when the Ukrainian drone subs got near the Russian fleet in Sevastopol, they lost connectivity and washed ashore harmlessly. So they were going to strike some ships off of Crimea. Secretly told his engineers. Now, let's listen to Walter Isaacson. As soon as this gets published, Elon Musk throws a hissy fit, apparently, and Walter Isaacson has to go around and retract the whole thing. But listen to how slimy his retraction is. It's not even real. I mean, it really is amazing how much sway and how easily folks like Walter Isaacson are just sort of like, functioning as beat sweeteners.
Lead and the author and my friend Walter Isaacson, author of the new biography on Elon Musk. It's a really good read and a shockingly easy, breezy read. Walter, authors, journalists generally do not like to be part of the story. But you have now acknowledged that you're going to have to correct one portion of the book that over the weekend I asked some public figures about. So let's just dive into this. You write in the book that Ukraine last fall was going to attack the Russian Navy near Crimea and was going to use Musk's Starlink to help guide its sea drones. You wrote, quote, throughout the evening and into the night, Musk personally took charge of the situation. Allowing the use of Starlink for the attack, he concluded, could be a disaster for the world. So he secretly told his engineers to turn off coverage within 100 kilometers of the Crimean coast, unquote. And then obviously the sea drones didn't work. Tell us what exactly is going to be corrected and what the reality, what the accurate story is.
Absolutely, and thank you for asking, because that night he was in a real high state of anxiety that this could cause World War III, could cause a nuclear response. And he told me we are not allowing Starlink to be used for this drone sub-attack. And I thought and wrote that man he turned it off that night. And later he said to me, no, it was already turned off. I just reaffirmed our policy. And so instead of turning
Pause
it
it
off
for
that
1 second.
night,
I mean, just like, how do you reconcile? He told me later that, I mean, why didn't he go back and change what he wrote? Why did he use the word secretly? Why did he use the word secretly? In neither one of those scenarios does the idea that this was secret happening. Like what, like, why would he secretly not turn on the thing? So either Isaacson just sort of like willy-nilly made this intrigue up, or is now backing off of what the real story was. But I'm sure Jake Tapper will ask his good friend why he did that as he gives this answer.
Turned it off that night. And later he said to me, no, it was already turned off. I just reaffirmed our policy. And so instead of turning it off that night, he just reaffirmed that it had been turned off. It's called geofencing. And what they had done is within 100 kilometers of the Crimean coast, it had been geofenced so that Starlink would not work. It would not enable this. But the Ukrainians didn't know. And I made the mistake of thinking that decision had been made that night. In fact, the decision, the geofence, had been made before. He just reaffirmed it that night. But it does get into the question of should he have allowed Starlink to be used for the sneak attack on the Russian fleet in Crimea? And by the way, should he be the one to have the power to make that decision?
Right, and his fear was that he was convinced that some Russian official had told him that Crimea was a red line and they would use nukes, although obviously the Russians are constantly threatening to use nukes. But as you note, the question, is Elon Musk the one that gets to make that decision? He obviously was, practically speaking, but is that how the world is supposed to function?
Right, and he made that decision that night, which is don't allow it to be used for this drone attack. And so that's the essence of it. And the question is, should he have been given that power? Well,
all right, he's being obtuse here because what decision did he make? Reaffirming a decision. Who asked him to do this? According to him, the Ukrainians didn't know, which is also really weird. You sell a product to people, you have a product that is geofenced, but I'm not going to tell you how. I don't buy any of that. It's all a lie. Then what decision is he making? I'm reaffirming the decision. Why did you have to reaffirm it? Did the engineers come and go like, hey, it looks like they're going to attack Crimea. Do you want to turn this on? Do you want to get rid of the geofencing that you have? And that, like Musk said, like, you'll explain that there's geofencing. It sounds technical enough that people don't know.
That's like an accurate, it's an industry term, right? So.
Yeah, no, this is very complicated. It's called geofencing. Like you literally can do that with your iPhone. Remind me when I get home that I need to feed the cats. No, it's quite clear that Elon Musk made this determination. And who knows? Maybe it could have ended the war earlier. Maybe if there was a genuine threat that Ukraine could retake Crimea, maybe that would have sped up the what hopefully will be inevitable negotiations to end this thing. But this is the problem with billionaires. We should not have billionaires. They should not exist. It's a complete mistake. I don't, somebody saying like, why 100 kilometers from Crimea? Crimea legally belongs to Ukraine. Like, why? Is this the case with Starlink? 100 kilometer from what else? Like, what else is outside of the bounds of Starlink? I mean, none of it makes sense. It's all a lie. Getting reports of a shooting at UNC Chapel Hill. That's the second time in 3 weeks. All right, I'm just going to read some IMs and then get out of here. I'm sorry, folks. Shortened show today. We'll read 5 of these and we're gone. Spencer 11. Hi, Sam and Bradley. Can I please get a shofar for my dad, Stanley Levine, who died randomly of a sudden cardiac arrest 1 year after suffering from COVID pneumonia for a month in the hospital? Oy. 77. He was still working as a workers' comp attorney in San Diego and helped union workers for over 5 decades. I know everyone isn't an elderly diabetic kidney transplant patient, but please, everyone, get your COVID booster. Spencer, so sorry to hear that. This is for your dad, Stanley. Wait, sorry. Hey, Square. Sam, so enjoyed Saul's visit, but so sorry about MR COVID outbreak. Glad all on the mend. Thanks for remember Chile, 9/11 coup, so important. The arc of the universe does bend towards justice. Kissinger will be in front of the Hague but that won't be in front of the Hague, but that doesn't mean he would live longer and continue to cause more misery. I try not to be a race reductionist, but so appreciate your continued focus on the history and implications of structural racism in America, coupled with the ills of capitalism. In the end, not surprising we're caught in this historical loop as Reconstruction was sabotaged and abandoned. So loved hearing from John from San Antonio and Jeremo this week. Hoping Brenda will call again soon. All right, 3 more. Sam's big Discord. So Matt has enough energy for his projects. Exactly. Less bitter Canadian. Are these guys getting in on this? My BFF, both girls, and I used to sneak her dad's penthouse mags. Kids find things given the chance. Celebrating being back in my PhD program, studying the rise of fascism on social media. Enjoy. 2 more. Sam's tortured analogies. Here in Maine, you can't go online or turn on the TV without being barraged by ads from CMP crying, "Where's the plan?" And it will cost taxpayers a majillion. God knows how many cajillion they're spending on these ads, but their pockets are bottomless. Meanwhile, I see no pushback from the other side. It's pretty depressing. Go to Pine Power. Is it pinepower.org?
Pine Tree Power.
Pinetreepower.org. Get involved in that pushback. And the final IM of the day. Smedley. Senator Kennedy, quote, "Little boy blue, come blow your horn." All right, folks. Somebody will be here tomorrow. Not sure who. But appreciate your patience with us. Bradley, good job solo today. Matt, Emma, hope you're feeling better. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted